Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to talk about the use of ceremony in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. To begin this talk today, I want to talk about the question of whether psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy is a spiritual experience. This is a big topic and there's lots of opinions, so bear with me on this one. Clearly, the psychedelic experience is a spiritual experience for many people. It may be, for many of you watching this, it may have been that or may continue to be that. And for many clients, it will be as well. This is a well-known quality of the psychedelic altered state and potentially very healing and valuable one. So what I want to speak to today, though, is the assumption that I find in some providers that it is by definition spiritual, that this work is spiritual, and that it will be spiritual for the client. Please know that for a significant segment of the client population, they will not experience a psychedelic journey as spiritual. When you are doing this work in an outpatient setting, a significant amount of people do not experience it as a spiritual experience, nor is that something that they want or have an expectation for either. So the important thing that I would like to emphasize is that the experience is not framed that way for people who do not want it or expect it and don't identify with it as spiritual. I think this is important because so many of you who are working in this field or training in this field come from different subcultures that understand this completely different and have your own beliefs about it. I think if you are a provider working in a practice that markets itself and uses language from the beginning that this is we're working with this in a spiritual way, in that case, your client population is probably self-selecting and people who are wanting that and that are on board for that. And in that case, I think that that's completely legitimate. My concern is for those of you working in more medicalized settings or more mental health practices where some people coming in may be referred because they haven't gotten benefit from other styles of therapy and they're wanting this as an enhanced psychotherapy practice, but they may not be viewing it as spiritual or wanting it to be a spiritual experience. And in that case, even if you consider it a spiritual medicine, it's very important that you don't put that language or the spiritual trappings around that onto the client. That can be jarring or uncomfortable and off-putting for people who don't view it that way and don't want to view it that way. I've had many clients who tell me that the psychedelic state for them doesn't feel spiritual. It feels like a higher state of awareness or a state where they can sort of see themselves more clearly or think through things in different ways, have a perspective that they never had before on content of their life or their experience. And that can be very powerful in a psychotherapeutic sense. So we often work with people fully in that framework. That said, many people will have a spiritual experience in the office during a psychedelic session. Those who want it and expect it, but also some of those that didn't want it or expect it. There's no predicting where the medicine will go. And our job is to be present and be able to be a guide no matter what shows up for the client, as long as it is intrinsically and authentically coming from them and is their experience, their lived experience. And if they have a spiritual experience they are not expecting, that can be quite profound and powerful. And then we work with them in integration on what that means for them and integrating it into what they think, what resonates with them about what that means for them. And then clients that don't have that experience, then it's not relevant. The content that they do have is what we work with. A shift in the way that they process trauma or information, then we work with that. So all this is to say that you don't know what the client's experience will be, nor should you, because these experiences are intensely personal and individualized. everyone's experience on a psychedelic medicine is their experience. So whatever happens needs to authentically happen for them. So I speak to this only to keep in mind that though you may deeply feel that this work is spiritual, you may do a disservice to your clients if you try to put that language on it for them. So I speak to this part first because the intention of today is to talk about the use of ceremony. So having said what I've just said, I actually do think that ceremony can be powerful and appropriate. Now, I do use ceremony, and I do teach people to think about the use of ceremony in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. You guys are, from my experience, roughly in two camps. Those who use it already, are comfortable with it, and then those of you who feel that this work is a little bit more in the world of mainstream medical or psychotherapy intervention and shouldn't be ceremonialized. And then some people who are in between. But for the purposes of the discussion today, I'll speak to those kind of two viewpoints. So those of you who do orient towards this work spiritually, I've already said, please be mindful of whether that's appropriate for your particular client. But that being said, let's assume that a lot of times it is a really powerful intervention to use ceremony. And ceremony can be a lot of things. So what is that? Ceremony can be things that we think of as ceremony that have the trappings of spiritual, or what some people think of as more occult or non-scientific sorts of things like tarot cards or smudging, or there's so many things that a lot of you watching are aware of and use as tools, right? Ceremony, though, can also be something as simple as lighting a candle at the beginning of the session and blowing it out at the end, mindfully, right? A really simple ceremony for people starting out to implement is having a client bring an object from home that's meaningful for them. When you're beginning the session, have them turn off their cell phone, sort of intentionally, and hand it to you. And then you hand them their object, and they take that, and eye contact, and then lay back, and we start the session, right? That's an example of a ceremony. Playing a particular song. Anything that is meaningful to the client, that's the important part, and that signals a shift from ordinary everyday life into a different level of awareness or a different level of paying attention. So it's a signal that something is starting. And then similarly, at the end of a session, some sort of signal that we're closing this experience and we're re-entering back into our ordinary lives. Maybe we blow out the candle. Maybe the person takes the object that they've been holding and they hold it to their chest. Okay, we're shifting out. They put it back in their purse. You hand them their cell phone. You smile. Okay, we're coming back into reality. We turn that on. That's an example. It can really be anything that is a signal that something important is going to happen and we're now starting it. And at the end, the signal that we've come to completion here. We're going to transition back into your ordinary life, get ready to leave the room, or so on. So be creative with that. I don't want to take a lot of time in this video listing the kinds of things you can do, but I would encourage you guys to put that in the comments section for each other, just to share ideas. So that being said, let's go back to the idea of this kind of two groups of you who are watching this. Those of you who are already using ceremony as a significant part of the experience, one, make sure it's authentic for the client. Some of the ideas for what to do should come from the client. It should be a collaborative discussion. It shouldn't be something that you just arbitrarily do that they don't really resonate with or weren't expecting. Please don't use items or elements of ceremony that are specific to a specific culture that is not yours or the client's. One, that is cultural appropriation and inappropriate in that context. And secondly, it's not authentic for the client. Always in this work, anything that you develop together needs to feel meaningful personally to the client, whatever it is. So use elements of ceremony that don't culturally appropriate, that feel meaningful to your client, and then do just make sure that they're on board for this, the spiritualizing of the experience, so to speak, then that's authentic for them. If you are in the second group, if those of you who don't feel comfortable with ceremony because you come out of sort of more mainstream psychotherapy training, you're used to being in an office doing therapy, now you're doing psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, you don't want to do anything that feels too, kind of spiritual or different, or doesn't really feel authentic to you, then I would encourage you to actually consider incorporating ceremony. But you can do this in a very in a sort of secular, or a way that doesn't feel religious, right? Example of that is what I said about the cell phone, or maybe a candle, or a song, or other ideas. So what you do is you talk to your client about, we're going to do something just to signal that we're starting. This is usually right after the medicine has been administered, but before it's fully kicked in, or right before it's been administered. We're going to do something to start, and then this is what we're going to do at the end. It can be very, very simple, but despite everything that I've said about not overdoing the ceremonial piece, I actually do think it's important to incorporate some element of ceremony that signals a beginning and an end. Otherwise, the client's psyche doesn't know when to make the shift, right? If we're just giving them a medicine and then we're just going along as usual, you will often find people saying things like, are we starting? Or when is it going to start? Or when am I feeling? It sort of needs to be named, or that this experience is beginning, and then at the end that this experience is ending. It's actually really helpful for the client, and it is more authentic to what the experience really is. So in conclusion, I think I've spoken enough about my concerns about putting spirituality on the client if it's not authentically their frame of reference. And in that context, being mindful of use of ceremony. And then the second point being, to those of you who don't do any of this at all and who think of this as a very medical intervention, not spiritual, consider some use of ceremony that feels, appropriate to that, or that you can get behind, because it will make a difference. And I do think it's you may be underdoing the use of ceremony. So this has been very brief. Obviously, there's a lot more that can be said, but that is the main points that I wanted to make at this level of training about use of ceremony. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.